Because
Recording in progress.
our final presentation is taking place in 1 day versus 2 days, which I've done in the past, we're going to extend the class duration for finals to about 9 o'clock, 9:10, 9:15. So we may have 1 or 2 students who will not be doing the presentation. So I want to be able to give enough time for each student to present between 3 minutes to 5 minutes. I always, for city council, you only get 3 minutes. But I find it very hard for students to just go at the 3-minute mark. So I'm gonna give a little bit of a 2-minute grace period in this so that you get about 5 minutes of a presentation. And then during that time, after your presentation, then we'll have the, our director of PBOT who will be here to comment on your project. And also in place of Joanne Harsey, she will not be able to make it, she'll be out of town. The week of your finals, we'll have our PBOT equity manager, Wendy Sereno, who was supposed to be here in the first day of class but couldn't make it. So she'll be here at the latter half of that evening. So we'll have Erin Gala, who's with PSU. We'll have our deputy director, Chris Warner, and then Wendy Serrano with PBOT equity and inclusion. So that's the agenda for finals. I'm gonna just let you know about it. We are gonna go a little over time, so I just want to be cautious of it. For those of you who really absolutely need to get out of here at a certain time, let me know, and then we'll prioritize your presentation first. So that's what I have for presentations. Again, remember your scavenger hunts game. There are prizes involved with that, so I hope you do still participate. And then the field trip. So we have about 9 people from this class who will be going on the field trip. 2 people from previous class who will accompany us. We do have your bus as the day bus pass. So come to me in the middle of class at break or at the end. I'll give it to you. And also, if you need bike town codes, let me know. Again, I'm going to work with our colleagues at PBOT to get that to you. I think that's it. What have anything else for you? Anybody have any questions from last week's? Questions about projects, timing, about the world? Okay, so today we're going to talk about active transportation, and we're going to have a packed night actually. So we have Hagedorn with TREC PSU. She's going to talk about the Oregon bike bill, so she's going to kick us off to talk about the Oregon bike bill, and then we have our very special Judge Kemp, the man of all trades, the mysterious man of all trades. I'm learning so mysterious.
Yeah, I've expanded her world.
Yes, you have expanded my world. You totally blew me away. He's lived many lives before this. But tonight, as you know, he's going to talk about the transportation wallet. So he's going to talk about his current life.
Yes.
At PBOT, not his many past lives. We will break. And then we have Dan Layden also with PBOT. He's going to talk about.
I've only got one life.
You only have one life, but you can also talk about the life that you had lived when you were a student here. You were once a student here, once upon a time. So very nice to meet you, Dennis. First time meeting you.
Yeah.
I love your shirt. Says love.
Thanks. It's a hand me down to my daughter. She didn't like it, so I ended up with it.
You know you're gonna go live on TV, kind of on YouTube with that.
No, okay, well,
So it works. Yeah, so Dan's gonna talk about the Earl Blumenauer Bridge, the construction. So it's gonna be a packed night of active transportation and more. So I'm just going to let it roll. And I'll have yes. Okay, you're up first. Great. All right.
I was gonna pull up my Google slides, but I'll just roll with our my PDF version of this. So, hi, my name is Hagedorn. I am the Associate Director for the Transportation Research and Education Center here at PSU. I think I have one life, but I wear many hats. And so in this presentation, I'm going to talk about the many hats that I've worn and not necessarily in my role as with TREC. So a little bit about my presentation. I'm just going to share a little bit about me and my passion for active transportation, specifically biking and walking, transit too, but mostly biking and walking. History and context of the bike bill. What is the bike bill? Because I think it's a really important context that I think has been forgotten. And I think it's really important for you all to understand what the bike bill is and how it can show up in policy planning and implementation. I'm going to use the I-205 as a case study to talk about certain clauses in the bill, specifically exemptions. And then I'm just going to quickly go over the 1%, which is an aspect of the bike bill that transportation agencies must expend annually on biking and walking. And then some key takeaways to help inspire you when you are looking at projects. And then hopefully it'll trigger like, oh yeah, wait, that agency should be following the bike bill, but maybe they aren't. And so I want for you to take away from this how the bill can be used to actually try to change things within the various cities you may live in. Okay, so a little bit of background about me. So I have an interest in advancing biking and walking in Oregon, and I've done that through different capacities. So I actually first met Judge when he worked for the state of Oregon in the governor's office, the executive committee's office, when I was recruited to be a member of the Oregon Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee. On my role on that committee, I was asked by a community member to look at ODOT's interpretation of the bike bill as it applied to the I-205 freeway expansion project. My passion also is accountability and transparency, and trying to demand that from our agencies, because as public servants, we need to demand and see what we're getting from our investments.
And you're good at it.
I don't know if I'm good at it, but I do demand, and I ask a lot of questions. And then through this work, or through being on OMPAC and exploring the bike bill, that was the inspiration for my graduate school capstone. And so I dug deeper into the policy implications of the bike bill and wrote a paper on it. So you can download it after class if you'd like to read through it. And as a result of this work, I did work with the Street Trust when Judge was there too. So like we have these connections, and we helped to introduce an update to the bike bill, which was unsuccessful in the last legislative session. And that was SB 395, Safe Routes for All. So just a little bit of history. So how many of you were born before 1971? Okay, a couple of us, right? Okay, so the bike bill has been around for 50 years. It's been around for longer than most of us, right? And so it was enacted in 1971. And then OMPAC, the committee that I served on, was established a couple of years later. The BTA, which was the Street Trust back in the day, was founded in 1990. In 1993, the BTA sued the city of Portland. Initially, they were unsuccessful, but they were finally successful in getting the city to actually take the law seriously. And since that time, it's been one of the catalysts to, I think, transforming the city of Portland. And Dan may have a different version, but I think it's one of the catalysts to turning the city around to be a more bike-friendly city. So since that time, I'm just gonna go through like what has happened. Do you think we have met our goals? I know City of Eugene and Portland, we have aspirations to have 24 to 25% bike mode share by 2035. Do you think that's achievable in 23 years? And then look back, what have we done in the last 50 years? So, and how are we going to get there? So how many of you are familiar with the bike bill? I'm curious. Okay, a couple. So this is good. So the bike bill has five main provisions. So the first is it requires any agency that to construct bikeways and sidewalks whenever a road is reconstructed or constructed with the use of state highway funds. So that's the flavor of money is really important. But it's also, it also requires anybody that gets state money to build bikeways and sidewalks. The second provision, it has 3 types of conditions where an agency can not adhere to that. And so they don't have to follow the law if it's contrary to public safety, if the cost is excessively disproportionate to the need or probable use, or where the sparsity of population, other ways, or other factors indicate an absence of need for such paths and trails. And these exemptions, I mean, think about it. They were created 50 years ago. And so are these still relevant today, 50 years later? And then the third is that agencies must expend a minimum 1% annually. That's a minimum. The fourth, ODOT must provide technical assistance. Actually, ODOT does that really well. It's one of the provisions that they do really well. And then the fifth, which is really important, is this definition of a bicycle trail. And that's defined as publicly owned and maintained law or way designated and signed for use as a bicycle route. So this is a design manual from 1972. And what is really striking about this design manual is that if you look at the image on top, the bike lane, the desirable bike lane width is 8 feet wide. The standard minimum today is 5 feet with no buffer. And so they have 8 feet, 7 inches of a buffer, and then another 2 feet buffer. So that was sort of the design guide back in 1972. And in some ways, we've taken a step backwards from what maybe it was an aspirational design guide. But it's just interesting to take a look back in the day to see what was the design standards and what are the design standards today. So in Oregon, here are some of the statistics. Oregon by the numbers. So we have a 2.2% commuters biking to work. Remember the goal of 23 to 24%. In Portland, it's around 5 to 7. I'm not quite sure what the commute mode is these days because of the pandemic. The percent of bicycle fatalities is 1.9%. It's a little bit lower than average. We expend annually about 21 million, or ODOT expends annually about 21 million of the state highway funds on biking and walking. That's an average from 2014 to 2016. So just some quick numbers. But the thing that's really striking is in the last 50 years, the percent of urban state highways with bike lanes and sidewalks in 2019 was 39%. So in the last 50 years, we've only been able to build 39% of the bike lanes that ODOT has planned out. And so now I'm going to go through each one of the different pieces of the law, because I think it's really important to understand what each one means. And so the first is, when does a project trigger the bike bill? And you can just go to the ODOT website in their highway design manual. I know there's a lot of words here, but basically ODOT has a categorization. If their projects are considered a 4R, those projects should include bike lanes and sidewalks in those types of projects. However, there are some isolated projects that may also trigger the bike bill, and that's really important to understand too. And so in bold right here, so for example, a portion of a project that can trigger the requirement to providing walking and biking facilities if the improvements include adding a turn lane, a through lane, widening a shoulder, or replacing a bridge deck, and significant intersection improvements and alignments. So it sort of broadens like the different types of situations where ODOT would be adding bikeways and sidewalks. I'm not quite sure what the criteria is for PBOT, and I'm focusing on ODOT because they're the largest agency in the state and they have the most amount of money. So exemptions, I mentioned the 3 exemptions before. And one of the things that's really important is with exemptions, an agency can have an exemption, but they need to document it. And they also need to allow opportunities for public review and input by interested parties. These are the rules that ODOT put together for their exemptions. And so if you are following an ODOT project on an ODOT-owned facility, and you're wondering like, why isn't there a bike lane or a sidewalk? Ask to see if there is a design exemption, and then ask for the documentation on why there is an exemption. And so I'm going to use so any questions so far? Okay. I know I'm doing a lot of talking and there's a lot. Oh, yes, go ahead.
What about the contrary to public safety
Yep.
exemption? How is that usually defined in terms of adding bike lane or sidewalk being contrary?
That is a good question. So in the case of ODOT and freeways, so they have this, I don't know if I'm using the right legalese term, but they have the ability to issue an administrative rule. And so what that administrative rule does is it prohibits biking and walking on certain parts of the freeway. And so they are saying these sections are not safe because of traffic, because of the speed of traffic, the volume of traffic, etc., or a narrow bridge. But as I go through this, you'll see some contradictory statements. So I'm going to use the I-205 freeway expansion project. And how many of you are familiar with that? Okay. So specifically, so currently ODOT is investing about $500 million into this phase 1 highway, so Abernathy bridge replacement. And it's basically this section right here. And here is the contrary to public safety. So when ODOT was considering replacing the Abernathy Bridge, they did look at options to adding a separated path or trail on the bridge to accommodate biking and walking. But in consultation with the Department of Justice, they decided that because they have, and this is a typo, it should be an OAR, because they have administrative authority, they're going to prohibit and restrict bicycles and non-motorized vehicles from that highway. And so essentially they are saying that this is contrary to public safety. We're not, because we don't allow people to bike and walk. So that's one way that they are exempting themselves. But we know that ODOT has built separated pathways on sections of freeway. And this is the Glen Jackson Bridge, and it was opened up in 1982. I don't know if it's the ideal path, but it is a path in the middle of I-205 connecting Portland and Vancouver. So it's the same OAR restriction, people biking and walking not allowed on shoulder, But here, they decided that they would add a multi-use path for people biking and walking. And then if you go down the exemptions, the other is the cost is excessively disproportionate to the need or probable use. And so in looking at the entire project, so phase 1 is just the Abernathy Bridge. Phase 2 is actually from Stafford, from the Abernathy to Stafford Bridge. They looked at adding a multi-use path from that section, but the cost would be $40 to $50 million. And so their justification is that 14% to 70% of the over project cost is too high for based on the people who would be using this multi-use path. And then here's another exemption for themselves. Other available ways or factors indicate an absence of any need for such paths or trails. And so their justification, again, using the law as written 50 years ago, alternative routes along existing city and county roads provide other ways for people to travel along in parallel to the corridor. So that's another way this agency is exempting themselves. Another, so another design element that they actually use is that actually people are allowed to bike on the highway shoulder. And so from their perspective with this redesign, they basically said that they're going to widen the shoulder from 12 feet to 14 feet. And so that's how they would accommodate bicycle travel on I-205 because people are allowed to bike there. So you can see sort of the contradictory statements that the agency is making. But this is where I feel like as citizens, this is where we need to raise questions like, but that is not, how is this safe riding along the highway on this section of 205? Would you ride on I-205? Yes?
So what did you say that Jackson was doing?
1982.
So that's 40 years ago.
Yes.
How much did that trail cost?
I'm not quite sure. I don't.
This was part of the bridge.
It was part of a bridge.
Yeah, so I'm kind of perplexed. Whatever it cost, it was built 40 years ago, 10 years after the like it's passed.
Yeah.
So now ODOT doesn't want to do what it already did.
Yes.
It's idiotic nonsense.
And I think this is important because I don't think most people understand the bike bill. And so when you don't understand the policy and the implications, you don't know what questions to ask. And so I think my desire is to help people understand the bike bill and how these agencies have been interpreting it so that you can ask those questions.
So
Mhm.
the documents, other documents from 1981.
I did not look into that. I did not look into that. And that's a good question. There are other examples of multi-use paths that were built. Yeah.
I-205.
Yes. All along I-205. Yep. And then have you ever used the multi-use path along Highway 26? It's amazing. It's amazing, but then it stops. And so I think at some point in the history of ODOT, I don't know if it's a lack of, I don't know what happened, but they stopped looking at building multi-use paths with highway expansion projects. So they are looking at it with the Rose Quarter. There are some, if you dig into what ODOT is doing with the I-205 project, there are some active transportation elements, but it's just at some of the exits, right? But it's very few. They could be doing more. And then you had a question.
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably just getting ahead of myself, but like, is there like a proposal to change this so that like the wording isn't so vague and like you can't have all these?
That's what we worked on with the with SB 395 Safe Routes for All. We were going to propose some newer language, but it didn't even make it past committee. So I think there is support among the public, but I think there was a lot of opposition from the cities and counties. So I know that when we were doing the work, that the Association of Counties and Cities, they were flat out against any updates to the bike bill because it would compete with just transportation agencies have to deal with a lot of issues. And to them, that would take away from just like maintaining roads, right? And they're at a deficit right now with maintaining their roadways. So. So I just want to quickly go through the 1%. So ODOT did track their highway state fund expenditures from 1985 to 2016. And if you look at like the total expenditures, which is in blue, 1% is in red. So it's just a blip, right? And the expenditures over those 32 years totaled 144 million. And I just want you to think about like, how does that compare to like highway expansion? So we know that the Rose Quarter, the current estimates is that to expand the Rose Quarter, it's going to cost between 715 million to close to $800 million to do that. And one thing that I find very ironic is that they forgot to include the cost of inflation back in their preliminary estimates, and the cost of inflation is basically what was expended on bike and ped projects over 32 years. So that's just a point of comparison. And then just the cost of replacing the Abernathy Bridge is close to $500 million. So we need to ask more from our agencies. And then the 1% is inadequate however you slice it, because even with the current level of fundings, I showed you the graph before, it's going to be impossible to complete the walkway and bikeway system on the state system by 2030. So here's the 1% compliance. So I looked at that, and there were 8 years where ODOT expended below the minimum 1%. And you know, it's been really difficult when you ask any agency how much they expend, and I understand it's difficult to track, but it's really something that is difficult to get from agencies. So they're not going to likely have those numbers. And then just some key takeaways, because to me, a more bike-friendly community means that we can bike with our kids. So we should be signing legislation on bike seats, but we should also be able to change our kids' diapers, right? When we bike. And so that's me with my kids when they're younger. But some key takeaways is that the bike bill applies to any agency. So whether it's ODOT, PBOT, Multnomah County, Clackamas County, whatever agency, if they are using state highway funds for a transportation project that requires reconstruction, they should be including bike lanes and sidewalks in it. And again, it applies to all state highway funds. The third key takeaway is that projects take a long time from planning to construction. And when I was asked to look at the I-205, it was beyond planning. It was getting ready to be built. And so at that point, like it's really difficult to impact change when you're not aware of the projects at the planning stage. And so now that you know that this policy and law exists, you can identify those projects. I try to identify those projects early on in the planning stages to make sure that bike lanes and sidewalks are included. And then also ask for clear, accountable exceptions. Why aren't they including it if it is a reconstruction project? And then the fifth is just to consider and support some policy changes. I think there are a lot of people who support changing the law, but then others are saying, well, you know what, we've done a lot of good over the last 50 years. We shouldn't mess with it because there are unintended consequences. So And that's it. You're welcome.
Thank you, Ian. Good evening, everyone. This is kind of a little different for me being on the other side, being up here in front of you. But before I dive into this presentation about the transportation wallet, I have got a couple of questions for you. How many of you have ridden the Bike Town e-bikes? Okay, majority of you have. How many of you have ridden any of the 3 scooters in the city? Fewer. Okay. How many of you have driven the car share free to move vehicles? Yeah, Cardigo's not in the city anymore. But the city has free to move is kind of the replacement for car to go when it comes to car share. So looks like we've got a little work to do to try to encourage other people to use additional modes of transportation. Scooters are a lot of fun if you haven't tried them. And a lot of the vendors, if you can reach out to them directly, or even find during the spring, there are opportunities where you can, test drive them for free. So this evening, we're going to talk about the transportation wallet. What is the transportation wallet? Why? Because that's always important. Why are we doing this? Transportation wallet types. There are 4 main transportation wallets. Funding, because we don't just have these products available just out of the air. So we'll briefly talk about the funding of the wallet, where that comes from, and also the future of the transportation wallet program. So what you see here, these are our mode icons. For the last several years, since 2017, there have been iterations of this design. We will be launching in 2023, something a little different. I'll be speaking more about that later. So what and why is the transportation wallet? Essentially, the transportation wallet are a series of credits and passes that are used to encourage people to take different transit options. One of the other modes that I forgot to ask is, how many of you take TriMet or have taken TriMet? So pretty much everyone here. So that's also a part of our transportation wallet, and I'll go into the basics of the wallet here shortly. But as you can see here, we want to encourage a multimodal approach when it comes to just not driving a vehicle, a car specifically. And so as for the why, we talk about the research, and we know that incentives are a great way to, get people to do a mode shift. And for us, we did surveys, we provided them with credits and passes for the tram, for the streetcar, for transit, essentially. So the program is really based off of transportation wallets for the parking districts, the affordable housing, which there's a new name for that now, as well as there's a new transportation wallet for movers program. So we talked about the why briefly. Really, it's essentially to manage parking supply. A lot of this data, a lot of information was done before the pandemic. Currently, right now, there are more parking spaces available because our work model has changed. We have a lot more people doing remote working, so there's more supply for parking than there was 2 years ago. But our goals really are the same. We really want to try to reduce single vehicle occupancy trips. It's better for the environment. We want to increase trips with other modes of transportation. So again, trying to get that mode shift with the transportation wallet. So more specifically, the transportation wallet in parking districts. We have these two shaded areas, Central East Side and Northwest parking districts. To date, we've had over probably 7,200 transportation wallets distributed in the city since the program started back in 2017. This is how you can actually get a transportation wallet. You can either purchase it outright for $99. But again, you have to live in either the Northwest Parking District or the Central East Side Parking Districts to apply for the wallet program. We also have an equity program, the Golden Transportation Wallet. You receive all of the benefits as you would for the $99 transportation wallet. You get it for free. During the pandemic, we had a frontline workers wallet, essentially the same thing, for free if you worked for a business or something such as a store, or hospital, things like that. So this is what you get. If you happen to reside in the Northwest Parking District, you get a TriMet Hop card that is loaded with $175. It is not a monthly contribution, it's a one-time contribution. So you use it at your leisure. And if you're in the Central East Side, you get $200 loaded to a TriMet Hop card. Annual streetcar benefit, $99 Bike Town, $30 for the scooters, and that's $10 for each of the scooter companies that are participating. And then, as I previously mentioned, for the car share, free to move, you receive $30 in credits. We've also recently have an exclusive offer for residents in the Northwest Parking District. It's called the Transportation Wallet Plus. And so you receive all of the benefits and an additional $300 in free to move, car share credits. And so to qualify for that, you have to either sell or donate your vehicle. And also you promise not to purchase a Zone M parking permit. And this is an exclusive offer for the Northwest Parking District as well. So show me the money. I don't know a lot about the funding mechanism of the program, but essentially it is a surcharge that is placed on the net meter revenue. And you've got two different graphs representing the two different zones. Central East Side, the fees are more expensive versus Northwest Parking District, even though the benefits are the same. The other transportation wallet we have is for the affordable housing pilot. It is no longer a pilot. It's actually being rolled into something permanent in 2023. But we had 2 phases worth of pilots where we reached out and worked with several community-based organizations, low-income housing agencies to provide these benefits to them. And this is just kind of a breakdown. Anyone with an honored citizen pass for transit would also get a debit card loaded with funding that can be used for either renting your e-bike and also for taxis, Uber, scooters, and so forth. And these are just a few of the organizations that we reached out to partner with during the pilot program. And they represent 3 different packages for the program. Let's say, for example, if you happen to be an individual, you can also choose separate options, and then a family component. The funding model is a little different when it comes to the Hop card. That funding for the Hop card is actually broken out into however many people that are applying for that household transportation wallet. And this is just a little bit of the demographic makeup of the pilot program. I'm not going to go into speaking about the numbers. They pretty much speak for themselves. But as of this year, the transportation wallet for affordable housing project pilot, you can see how it just rolls off the tongue. It's being changed, the name is being changed to Access for All. That's so much easier to say and pronounce. It's got great, you know, A for A. In any case, and that comes to us courtesy of the funding approval for the surcharge that you may have seen if you happen to use Parking Kitty at all. So you would have received the notification, I believe, in July when that was put into place. Another one of the transportation products is the New Mover program. And this one's a little different from what we normally do, but it still has, you know, some of the products of an e-bike and also a TriMet hop card. This program is actually working with the commercial builders and property managers. They have it so that, you know, when the building comes online or receives its certification of occupancy, these builders, owners pay into a fund that includes fees to, you know, allow their residents, based off of the number of units in their project, to receive these free benefits. And so I actually, you know, put the codes in there and coordinate with the building managers and property managers to get this information distributed to their residents. And this is just, again, a breakdown of some of the products and why the metrics. And lastly is the transportation wallet app. I mentioned the future. So we are in the process of creating a wallet app. It will have all of that functionality at your fingertips. You'll be able to have your hop card, you'll have your Bike Town membership, all of that on your phone. There's going to be a little icon that you download via the Apple Store as well as Google Play Store to your phone. We'll have a new website. We will have new icons. So this is what you'll find in the App Store. And so these will be rolled out in early 2023. I think it's probably going to be spring-ish, around April, when everything is has been tested. So it will have, you know, a lot of functionality, trip planning in the app. One of the things I'm really happy about is the instantaneous translation. So we'll be able to reach a broader audience in the city, in addition to the parking districts. One thing I forgot to mention is in 2023, when we do roll out the app, we won't have so much paper that we're printing, as well as I actually physically stuff envelopes with a lot of vouchers, but I also send out electric, you know, emails with codes and things just as a backup. The website will also have the ability to, let's say, if you want to you earn a coupon, you'll be able to access that via the app as well. And that's all, folks. Any questions? Yes.
I'm just wondering, like, you know, this is sort of exclusive to the parking districts. Is there plans to expand to other parts of the city slash?
Yes-ish. And by the ish, I mean, yes. So in 2023, we do plan on rolling the Access for All. That's the low income component that will be open to all residents of, if they qualify, that is, of the city. The parking district wallet components will still remain the same. I believe the difference really will be that Central East Side will not have the annual streetcar pass attached to it, whereas Northwest will. Next question. Yes.
Yeah, so, you talked a lot about the affordable housing program.
Mhm.
You know, just getting back to kind of what Tara was talking about last week with, maintenance costs and all of that, has there been any discussion with Metro about utilizing some of
It's a really good question, and I don't know. Since Metro, I will say, I believe there have been discussions in partnering with some of the low-income organizations that Metro works with and the wallet. So we're actually, I think last week or earlier this week, there's an RFP open for solicitations for business organizations to take part in that low-income program that we have. Yes,
Sorry, this question isn't fully formed yet, but.
it's okay. Neither am I.
For like the bike and scooter subsidy, so how would that fit for somebody who like can't ride on a traditional bike or scooter?
You know, that is a great question because we do have Bike Town adaptive bikes. And so anyone that would like that benefit is open to it as well.
So where are these adaptive bikes? I've heard of them, but like, what's the process of trying to get?
So to my knowledge, I have not ridden one, but to my knowledge, it's on the other side of the Esplanade. There is a place where you can get them.
It's just them.
Yeah. Yes.
Is there any way to this program can integrate like restaurants or different type of business in the city to make it bigger? For example, I don't know, a Starbucks, you know, Starbucks. If you do a certain kind of amount of rides, maybe you can get certain type of benefits.
Actually, yes. The one, in fact, I'm going to go back. So you see here, there is an image of hot chocolate or latte or something. So essentially, let's say, for example, if you ride, you know, the max to a Timbers game, you'll automatically receive a $5 off coupon after you register on the transportationwallet.com site. And you'll be able to access that, and that'll be, you know, from the Timbers or another business, for example. Yes, Joe.
Is the transportation law renewable? Is it one time? How does it turn over and suspend all the money on the
You put your thumb out and lift your sock. No, so it's actually one.
Previous life.
I'll show you a video later. So the transportation wallet is one per calendar year per person. So it's not essentially renewable in that context, but each calendar year you're available to apply for a new one. And when the app rolls out, the way the funding will be done is, I think, for example, you will have access to the first $100 of your hop card benefit. You have to spend it down to 50 before you receive the additional, you know, 100 or whatever.
Does it run out at the end of the year, or does it roll over to the next year?
Any monies on your hop card are there. You know, there's no expiration date on monies that are on a hop card. As for running out though, no, it won't run out. But there is a maximum dollar amount you can put on a single hop card, which is $250. Yes.
Just looking at the funding sources, is there been sufficient funding to meet the current needs?
We can always use more money.
Well, I'm just curious, a lot of those folks would be probably on the Barton Health plan, and I'm just wondering if there's been options to explore Medicaid funding, because that is a transportation that's a reimbursement service under Medicaid.
So if someone has Medicaid or receives any of the social services, SSI, all of those things, they automatically apply for, qualify for the low income hop card, the low income transportation wallet.
So regardless if they're in the housing pilot or not.
Right. Well, again, that'll happen in 2023 when it's open to the rest of the city. But That's also going to be, we're still building everything now. And so we have this very long list of, if you're part of this, if you receive funds from this organization, this organization, this organization. So we're trying to front load the software to recognize these programs once we receive that information. So
So it's right that the emphasis for the program was too high of parking demand in Northwest and Central East Side.
yes,
Okay.
and it's just a strategy for being more environmentally sustainable. It's a TDM, transportation demand management strategy for parking management. There's lots of benefits. We also try to be more equitable with our Golden Transportation Wallet program, which will be sunsetting at the end of this year. And we'll be launching it as part of the Access for All program.
To get people to sell their cars because they have so many other options, or just driving. Because if someone's living in this area, it's a neighborhood car. There's so many parking for them.
Right. If they have the option of actually, let's say, for example, let's use Northwest Parking District. If you happen to live within the Northwest Parking District and own a car, but you're not using it, you could sell it and apply for the Transportation Wallet Plus and get that for free.
One,
More questions? I'm here all night. No, I'm just kidding.
You actually are.
True,
This
true.
is great. Let's give him a hand. That's great. We come back at 7:45.
Okay.
Thank you.
Alrighty, we're gonna change gears. Pardon the, whoa.
I'd like change gears.
We're gonna change gears, yeah. We're gonna talk a little bit about a bicycle project that I think most of you are probably familiar with. Let me ask, since everybody's sort of starting with a question, let me ask the question. How many of you have ridden or walked over the Blumenauer Bridge? Almost everybody. There's still a few out there who haven't. How many of you have driven underneath the Blumenauer Bridge? All right, there's still a couple that they have not experienced the Blumenauer Bridge. I'm Dan Layden. I'm a project manager at City of Portland Transportation. Just a little bit of background, since everybody's sort of doing the history of background. I did take this class back in 1992, which was my first year working in the city, working in Portland. I worked for a variety of transportation agencies. I worked for the city for a year. I was the first bicycle and pedestrian coordinator for Multnomah County back in 92. So the bike bill is close to my heart and has been close to my wallet for a number of years because I've worked on a lot of bike and pedestrian projects funded by the bike bill. I worked for ODOT for 5 years, and then I've been at the city for 22. So this project has sort of been the culmination of that, and it's been a great project. So we'll talk a little bit about the Blumenauer Bike and Pedestrian Bridge. Do I do the slides or you do them? Or
Whatever
you
you
do them?
like.
I can do them. So just a few fun facts on the bridge. It's 24 feet wide. We've allocated that sort of softly, 10 feet for pedestrians and 14 feet for bikes. The reason the bike side is a little bit wider is because of the slope of the bridge and the fact that you can get some speed going down. It's 434 feet long and the main span is 380 feet. So it's a pretty long bridge. It weighs 1,900,000 pounds. That's 380 elephants if you care. And it's, we'll talk about this in more detail. It's founded on grout piles. There's 28 of those and they're as deep as 150 feet. So there is a lot underneath the bridge that you can't see just from the top. We'll talk about the type of bridge. It's called an asymmetrical tight arch. I'll explain to the best I can as a non-trained, not an engineer, certainly not a structural engineer, a planner who can kind of talk like an engineer sometimes. And then the last sort of fun fact, maybe hopefully never really needed, but if there is the big one, the 9.0 massive earthquake, this bridge, at least theoretically, will be available for use for emergency vehicles. Somebody asked me once, will it be used for bicycles? And I'm like, I'm not sure that's going to be really high on your list of priorities at that point in time, but yeah, I suppose you could ride your bike across it. That is actually important because most of the bridges in the city, and particularly most of all of the other bridges across Interstate 84, will not likely be in great shape after that size of an earthquake. So the city will really be split in half because of that situation. So next slide, I can do it. So just a little bit of a context and background. We've talked a little bit today about transportation planning and bike planning in the city. And just for most of you are probably familiar with this, but the city actually has a really solid bicycle and pedestrian network. I mean, I've been in lots of cities, both here and in Europe and so forth. And Portland's bike network is really pretty remarkable, particularly for a United States city. The reason is you can really get around for the most part of the city. It's really strong in the east-west direction. It's not as strong in the north-south direction. And one of the reasons for that is because of the freeway. And it's not just the freeway, it's a natural gorge, the Sullivan's Gulch. So, and particularly in this area, that was really challenging. So we've been looking for a number of years at possibilities of, ways we could bridge that gap. The Lloyd District obviously is a critical land use area with lots of commercial development. The Central East Side, of course, is growing enormously, particularly residential wise. There aren't a lot of great ways to get across the freeway at this location. MLK and Grand have okay sidewalks, but you obviously have to cross over the ramps, and they don't work very well at all for bikes because of the streetcar tracks. 12th Avenue is a decent crossing we've squeezed just about as much as we possibly can out of 12th Avenue for bikes and pedestrian, well, more for bikes. The pedestrian sidewalks are fine, but, and it's not really connected to the district. So having a bridge in this location has been a kind of a desire for a long time. But it's also a really challenging place to build a bridge. And I'm going to talk just for a little bit about why that is. The major reason it's challenging is because of who owns the property and what the land underneath the bridge is used for. So as you're well aware, PBOT is the owner on both sides. We own Lloyd Boulevard, we own Flanders Street. We also own most of the slope on the north side, most of that bank on the north side. Obviously, Union Pacific Railroad owns the railroad and ODOT owns the highway. What made this challenging in particular was the fact that we did not have access to a big chunk of the area that we were bridging. And not only did we not have access in a permanent sort of way, we couldn't even really get any access to it temporarily. So it was really necessary to build to bridge that area. That was really the critical element. And that's a fairly long section, which is why the bridge is as long and as big as it is. So we looked at a variety of different options. I'm not going to go into this in great detail. We looked at kind of the prefab steel through truss bridge, which is similar to what we built for the Flanders Bridge. We looked at a couple of other options, kind of an arch. We looked at kind of the crazy cable stay option. That was way too expensive. And then the option we came up with was really this steel, this deck tied arch bridge. And I'll explain that in just a little bit. So this picture is a good explanation of this. So the way this works, and there's sort of a great story here. When we were first talking about this bridge, probably 5 years ago now, it wasn't all that long ago, but a few years ago, we were in the offices of KPFF, which is the engineering firm that designed the bridge. And we were talking about different options and what we could potentially do. And one of the designers kind of went up on the whiteboard and just kind of drew this thing. Well, we could do an arch like this, and we could do the deck. We could tie the deck to the arch. It's essentially what we built. I mean, so we didn't really have, even all that long ago, we kind of figured out a good option. So what this does is this arch is a very strong structural member. So it allows us to span this entire bridge. Most of the strength of the bridge is really in the arch. And then the deck, you can see where the bikes are, is tied on to the arch. So it's both, it has some supports that support it up on one side and then allow it to hang on the other side. And what that provides is both a bridge that is in compression and tension, which is, I'm not going to get into detailed engineering, but my engineers tell me that's a really strong thing. So it works really well. So that's kind of the story of how that, and of course, I think the other nice thing about it is it provides a very elegant kind of jump over the freeway. So that is a little bit of the background of how we built it, why we built it that way. Now a little about how we built it. Obviously, it was a fairly large process. We realized very early on that the biggest challenge of building this bridge, like I said before, is the fact that we didn't have access, particularly to the freeway, that we would, obviously not be able to do a lot with equipment on the freeway. We also realized that in order to really be able to build this bridge, we were going to have to close the freeway, and we were going to have to close the freeway in both directions. And that was sort of one of those moments where I went, oh, yikes, that's not going to be easy to do. But I do have to say, ODOT, I know they were here last week, ODOT was incredibly cooperative and helpful in allowing us to do that. I think it's not likely that most DOTs in the country, if you had gone to them and said, hi, we need to close the biggest freeway in the state for an entire weekend in both directions, would have said, sure, go ahead, no big deal, we're fine. They didn't quite say that, but they did say, I think we can make that work. And we did make it work. It helped that there was this like pandemic thing and there wasn't nearly as much traffic as we all expected, but it did work and it worked pretty well. So what we did basically is we pre-assembled this big span, which was about 280 feet of the bridge. On the south side, on 7th Avenue, we were able to close 7th Avenue, which was a helpful thing. So we assembled that temporarily, and then we built a temporary support on the north side of the freeway, and then launched it across and built the other parts. And when I get into the pictures, you'll see that. And some of you might have been there. Was anybody there when we did that? We actually had quite a crowd. It was pretty interesting. So just some pictures on the construction of the bridge, because I think it's interesting. First thing you do when you build a bridge, which may be a little counterintuitive, is you build really big holes on either side of where the bridge is going to found. And so this is the construction of our supports on the north side. We also on the north side really needed to get a little bit more land, because if you've been over there, you can see there's a fairly good sized landing. Most of that wasn't there. Most of that is the area that we had to create. So we built a retaining wall and expanded out that, flattened out that north side. So this is the contractor starting to work on the retaining wall. And these are just some photos of the construction, because construction photos are kind of fun. Here's another shot of our construction. This is taken obviously from the other side of the freeway, and you can see the excavation, and you can see the kind of the slope and the challenge really of this project and the limited amount of space there was to work with between the railroad and the freeway. So it was a really tight setting. This is a shot taken from the north side to the south side. You can see on the south side that the structure is taking place, the temporary structure or the permanent structure is taking place. And they can see the kind of the wall and just beginnings of the landing that we built. I will say, and I had a lot of people ask me this question when the structure kind of got to this point. They said, it doesn't look like it's going to line up. And I'm like, yeah, that's a temporary work bridge. That was not the permanent bridge that was on that side. So I like this picture just because it shows you that construction is not easy and clean. It's actually really kind of muddy and messy. So this is construction of our Kemp piles, which were the foundation of the bridge. So you can see another shot of the work bridge and some of the work that's going on underneath. And then this is on the other side, the assembly of the structure. The steel was actually fabricated in Vancouver, up in Washington, and then brought on site in pieces. And that worked really well until the last piece where we hit a TriMet bus, which unfortunately there was only one person on the bus, which was the driver, and he was actually injured. Not seriously, but it was one of these like very slow motion things where the truck just didn't quite make the turn. And but anyway, that was fun. So this is the structure now in place. You can see on the north side. So it was like or on the south side. It was brought over and then it was assembled in pieces. And this is just about before we did the launch. So probably the most critical and most difficult, challenging part of this project was actually launching the bridge across the freeway. And one of the reasons why there was a fairly significant delay was getting not so much I-80, not so much ODOT comfortable. It was really getting the railroad comfortable with what we were going to do, because right after we put it on the temporary tower, we needed to be able to put it across the railroad. So it was getting times where we could get closures from them, and just kind of, the railroad's hard to deal with. That's just the bottom line. They're the railroad. They've been there forever. They're challenging. So we finally did get to the point where we were able to close the freeway in October of 2021. And this is the start of the process. It was a huge process to do this. This is what's called a gantry crane that you can see here, the green crane. And essentially you'll see what that does, but basically it lifts, it held the bridge in place and then slung it, or pushed it across, kind of like a set of railroad tracks across to the other side. So this is the gantry crane being assembled on the freeway on the morning of the lift. This is the crane sort of being put into place. There were several cranes that they used. Congressman Blumenauer was actually there for a good part of the lift. As you are aware, the bridge was named after Earl Blumenauer, who was, some may not know, was actually a city commissioner, Portland City Commissioner for a number of years. before he went to Congress in 1996, and has been just a huge advocate for bike and pedestrian activity, both in the city and at the national level. So we felt it was really appropriate to have this bridge named after him. He also grew up not that far from the bridge in Northeast Portland. So now you can see the lift. So the bridge has been brought across from the south side to the temporary supports on the north side, and is in place. There's another shot of the lift where you can see them putting the thing, kind of putting all the pieces together, and you can see the gantry crane holding the bridge up while it's being put onto the temporary towers. That whole operation took about 9 hours. There's a great video online. I don't have access to it right now, but there is a great video online if you're interested in that. After we put the temporary bridge or the bridge in place on the temporary towers, then we had to pretty quickly build the rest of the structure to provide the support so that we could remove the temporary towers. So that's what's going on here. And there you can see, this is a shot from 12th Avenue. You can see that the bridge, now the arch is completely in place, and they can start working on the deck. This is a shot from the deck. You can see there, this is actually this part here is temporary walkways. This is the actual deck. So it's a steel deck rather than a concrete deck poured on top of it. This is a shot of where they're pouring the concrete onto the deck. You can see they're about halfway through with that. That's actually taken from a drone. Another shot sort of showing the construction of the pouring of the deck. The deck's finally completed in this picture. This is a shot of the north landing as it's being constructed. If you've gone across, there is a little bit of a jog. The reason there's a jog is because 7th Avenue actually is kind of turned in order to line up with Lloyd Boulevard. So we just, that jog is just there naturally. A little more construction of the deck or of the landings. And then finally opening day happened in July of this year. The donut shop down the street, our favorite donut shop, Voodoo Donuts, made us a donut cake. So this is a picture of the donut cake. And we actually had a huge turnout. We had about 5,000 people show up on a brutally hot day. But, it is what it is. So that is the opening picture of the opening night. I think that's it. Yes. So that is the story of the Blumenauer Bridge. I'd be happy to answer questions.
Opening day.
Opening day, who was there for opening day? I was there for opening day.
I was out of town.
I see. Yeah, and I can also answer questions about other stuff as well. But I know we're going to do a little panel discussion. Is that right? So,
The Sullivan Trail going kind of on the north side of the railroad tracks.
yeah,
Does that go to the steel bridge or is it Blumenauer? How are we going to get into that ravine? Where is the entry point? Is it
That's a
pass or-
darn good question. We looked at pretty carefully at the Sullivan's Trail as part of this. We did provide room for it to happen, but it's a really challenging project because there just is not a lot of room in a lot of those places. So I'm not sure exactly what's going to happen with that in the future. We do have a project that we've designed and are probably going to do in the next couple or 3 years, depending on funding, to provide a bike connection, because there's already a sidewalk, but a bike connection along Lloyd Boulevard that would connect to the steel bridge. But I don't really know whether the Sullivan's Gulch Trail will happen in that segment, just because it's very difficult. It requires a lot of retaining walls, just because there's not much room between the freeway and Lloyd Boulevard, and it's very, very steep. But we designed the bridge so it could happen if the funding became available. That was our commitment. And we did look at a couple of options, but it's tough. Yeah.
I've just heard some commentary that for like a couple blocks in each direction after the bridge, there isn't a ton there yet. So how do you feel about that? Like, do you want more development to happen kind of like right next to the bridge, the north and south side?
The north side is kind of, it's, what's there is gonna be there because there's big institutional buildings on either side. So on the north side, on one side is Metro and on the other side is the state office building. So that's not gonna change probably. There's a little bit of opportunity for development there. There's a lot of potential on the south side. There's that parking lot that where we sort of used as a staging area. I've heard there's definitely some potential for development there. We worked with the property owner there, and he's very interested in developing. I think over time, that's gonna change. I think what we're hoping to see is the bridge begins to activate that area a little bit more. And that some of the development from Burnside starts to move a little bit further north. You know, I think some of that I think will happen. I mean, the pandemic probably slowed that down a bit, but yeah, there is definitely, we'd like to see more development activity there.
The automobile dealers building on the southwest corner of 7th. and-
Yeah, they're developing that, I believe. Yeah. Yeah, that's gonna go. That was they were doing some utility work when we were building the bridge. So yeah, that's happening, right? The old automobile building. So there's some stuff happening, but
What are some of the entertaining things that happened while you were working on the bridge?
entertaining things that
Yeah,
happen.
you know, you have to have a little brevity during the process, something fun, you know, that you.
Fun happened during the bridge. I have to say that there were some fun things that happened during the bridge. The opening was really fun. The opening was great. I mean, I have been doing this for 25 years now, building projects, and I built a lot of stuff. Bridges, bike lanes, sidewalks, all over the place. But building something, most of the stuff we build is pretty utilitarian. We're a transportation agency. We build roads and sidewalks and people use them and I think they like them, but they don't enjoy them like they did the bridge. And so to see people and to see families really happy and excited to see it, something you built, that was really cool. That was really cool. That's probably what I would say. There were a few other things, but it was kind of interesting. The construction, I was not particularly involved in. Partly I changed jobs right at the start of it. Because of the pandemic, we worked from home. So even our construction manager worked from home. So we didn't have that kind of like day-to-day activity with the construction, but yeah. But the opening was really cool. And I've never liked openings. It's the first opening I've been to a ton of project openings. And normally it's the politicians who had nothing to do with the project get up and talk about how great it is and get all the applause and may remember your name if it's written down on a piece of paper. And they may mention like half of the people who worked on it. But a friend of mine used to say that it was the chance for the uninvolved to take all their credit. But this was a great opening. Anyways.
So Dan, did you talk about how much it costs to build the bridge?
I did not mention that.
And then the flavor of funding, because I think it's really.
Sure, yes, no, the bridge was either just south or just north of $19 million. We're not quite done yet. We haven't quite solved everything with the contractor, but it's somewhere around that number. It's a little bit or a little under 19 million, which is a lot of money. And it was funded through a variety of sources. The major source of funding was transportation system development charge funds. So that is the funds that when developers build buildings, they pay into a fund, and that's we've used that to do because of some changes in the rules on that funding. It's capacity of any kind now. It used to be just highway capacity. Now it's all modes capacity. So bike lanes and sidewalks can be built with that funding. And then we received about $5 million from Prosper Portland, from the large piggy bank that has funded a lot of my career, which is the Oregon Convention Center Urban Renewal Area, which was started. This is the best time convention, the urban renewal area ever. It was started in 1992, just as they were building the Rose Quarter and the Moda Center. So all of that huge development and all the other stuff that's happened over time has been part of that. So that was a big chunk of funding, some of the last funding from that. And then we did get some funding for both Central East Side and Go Lloyd from their parking revenue. So a mix of funding. No federal funds, even though it had Earl Blumenauer's name on it. We did not have federal funds.
So I can say that it's been like an integral connection to me because I live in North Portland. And for me to get to Southeast Portland,
Yeah.
I used to have to go down to the Esplanade,
Right, right.
of 16, and now I use it quite often.
Oh, good, good, good.
And I also see the fact that a lot of people use it because my kids play soccer at the Buckman Field.
Oh,
and
yeah,
so we're there. I'm driving or biking there, and I see more people like actually using that area for biking and walking.
Yeah, yeah. We've had a counter. We're going to have a bike and pedestrian counter, but we're having some issues mounting it on the bridge and some technical difficulties. We do have a temporary bike counter on the bridge, and when it doesn't get vandalized, which has happened a couple of times, we've averaged in the summertime, we were averaging for the first month or so, right about 1,500 trips a day. Now it's down more like 1,000 to 750. It depends on, I'm sure as winter happens, it's not nearly as much, but so it's been pretty good. It's been that compares with all of the other Willamette River crossings, with the exception of the Hawthorne Bridge.
No state highway funding.
No state highway funding. No. That's really, our state highway funding is what we call GTR, which is General Transportation Revenue, which is primarily goes to maintenance. We don't build a lot of stuff with state highway funding. Most of our funding for construction projects is either SDC or federal grants. We use GTR to match federal grants, but that's about it.
What's your next project on the pipeline?
My next project on the bike line is I'm retiring in February. So I don't have any more projects in the bike lane, but we have a lot of projects. I mean, obviously, probably the biggest thing that's happened is, of course, 82nd Avenue is now a City of Portland roadway. We have a project mainly doing a bunch of pedestrian crossing improvements there, and then a bunch of paving because the road's in terrible shape. So that'll be happening over the next 2 or 3 years. We have about $80 million of federal funding, ARPA funding for that. We have, let's see, what else are we doing? It's big. Capitol Highway will be opening this summer. That's a big bike, that has a big bike and pedestrian element. Most of our projects are either modifying roads to put in bike and pedestrian elements, mostly bike, a lot of, or enhancing the pedestrian element that's already there. We don't build a lot of new roads. The city is basically built. So we are building new roads. I was just talking to Tree about this. We have we're building a couple of roads in the, where the US Postal Service building was over in Northwest. The old post office was bought by Prosper Portland a few years ago, and eventually will get redeveloped. It's not happening as quickly as everybody hoped because of some stuff that's happened, like the pandemic. But yeah.
Any more questions for Dan?
Is there a mechanism where the state highway fund can tap if ODOT isn't doing something? Like if you were gonna try to cross 455, how does an agency, city, county cross a freeway if ODOT doesn't pay?
It's a little hard. I mean, I'm not quite sure how to answer that question. It's a complicated question. ODOT has used state highway funds, like some of the projects that he built. For one thing, most of ODOT's big highway projects are not funded by the state highway fund. There's partially funded by the state highway fund. They're almost all funded by federal funds. The state highway fund just isn't big enough to fund a $500 million Rose Quarter project or whatever. Those are all federal funds, or mostly federal funds. And they have requirements around bike and ped, as do ODOT's projects. But they have, like, for example, in some places, instead of building the bike and pedestrian facilities on the freeway or on the highway, they have given local jurisdictions funds in lieu of. One example, a number of years ago, when ODOT was widening I-84 out through Gresham and East Portland, they had built, the first phase, they built this really terrible multi-use path that was right up against the freeway, between the freeway and a sound wall, and it was really, nobody used it. It was horrible. It was loud. It was miserable. They actually gave my jurisdiction at that point in time, Multnomah County, a significant amount of money to rebuild Halsey Street with bike and pedestrian facilities which is basically paralleling the freeway, which provide a lot more use to the community. So there are some examples where they've done good things. But I think we're gonna have a discussion, so maybe I'll sit down.
Yeah.
We can
Let's
do our
sit down
panel.
and, so let's, I want to open it up for more questions. And we can take this as a panel Q&A with Judge and Hao and Dan together. So yeah, I'm gonna open the conversation up for any other questions you want to ask.
So it's sort of a general question about how mode share metrics are measured. Is it just like Census Bureau data, or does the state or any local jurisdiction tighter?
There's several ways. So there's the census data, and then I know that ODOT, I don't know if it's every 10 years, they have the OPOS survey. So it's the Oregon Household Activity Survey that has more questions that are directed at travel. So I think they're getting ready to do it again. So those are a couple of sources. But I would agree with you. I think the way that we are focusing only on trips isn't really helpful for people who are biking and walking, because a lot of the trips that are made are not for work. It's to take kids to school or to go to the store or for other types of trips. And so I think there needs to be more holistic.
Metro has a household activity survey as well, which gets a little bit more at that, but I have to tell you that in the surveys are really expensive.
They are expensive.
That's part of the issue, why they don't happen as much.
And then I think it's really helpful to so Dan talked about counting bikes with so counting bikes and pedestrians, different, I would say, technology. So like a Tolkien bridge, if you've biked across it, you see the bike counter.
Yeah.
So it's really important to get that data, but we don't have enough coverage of it.
Yeah.
And so that's another way to understand like how many people are using the different.
We have that on Flanders and we have that on Hawthorne, we work. Unfortunately, not all the time. I mean, part of it is right now, it's really hard because it's really hard to keep anything on the streets. It's frankly just not event. It's a huge issue for us.
So TREC does maintain, it's called Bike Ped Portal. So it's a non-motorized bike ped count database, and we do have count data from various locations across the country. Some for Portland, but the coverage could be better. So it gives you a sense of how many people are like wanting, comparing it across cities and jurisdictions.
I see that a lot of mask arms using radar, thermal imaging detection. Use them. Something that's really far, it's could have to be used as a count triggers.
You could probably mount something on a mast arm. I don't think that particular most of those, there's some that are for bike detection, and a few places where that happens. The blue lights. I don't know whether the blue lights would count. I mean, I suppose you would know how many times it's triggered, but you wouldn't necessarily know how many flags. Maybe, I don't, it's an interesting question. I
So
don't know.
PSU did a study on, and I don't, because it's, so the city, so Peter Cones likes to use the
Yeah.
inductive loops for detection. And we had some researchers look at using that data to count bikes and pedestrians, but the data is really messy. And so we haven't really cracked that nut. Washington County uses FLIR, which is what you're talking about is the thermal imaging, and they use it for detection, but it's not quite there as far as like counting people, bicycles.
For people who don't know, Peter Quince is the city of Portland.
Signal bank.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Signals, lighting.
Yeah.
Former board member from Switch.
Yes.
as well.
Oh, sure.
Peter and I actually went to high school together. People can believe that.
Wow.
I can't believe that.
I can't believe that. Yeah, no, we went to high school together. And he came to this class a couple years back to talk about COVID and its impacts on traffic.
Hmm.
I'll bring him back next year. He's a good guy.
You talked about how it's difficult to track money spent. Do you have any recommendations or tools? I've looked into that before, just how much money has been spent in the last 10 years on freeway projects, and I really kind of just ran into a brick wall.
So have you looked at, so ODOT has their SIP, right? Their statewide improvement plan, and that's on the internet, but it's like 200 pages of projects. So
Very
you
transparent.
could, I know. It's not a spreadsheet, it's just a PDF with
Yeah.
all the
Spreadsheet.
projects.
There's a
Is there a spreadsheet there? And then they have a map
You can get a
too.
condensed version.
So that is a good place to start. And then I think like there are some other, because I was looking into this too, because they have to report on their spending. And so I think there's another place on the ODOT website where you can actually get a spreadsheet of where, how, like of all the projects. It might be in their finance or their auditing section. Their website.
Federal sources, but I was wondering, you talked about how the federal government funds
Mhm.
the bulk of like private projects. I guess you have like a sense of what's the sort of ratio between the typical ratio between federal money and state money on I guess highway projects specifically. Is it still, I know the interstate highway was like 90-10 or something.
Yeah, so the, for federal projects, the minimum match ratio is 10 point something or another. It's, that's all based on how much the state contributes versus how much the state gets in revenue. But basically it's 10%. The challenge with trying to figure out how much we're spending on bike and pedestrian is, at least for the city, and I think to a good extent for ODOT as well, is we don't build a lot of highways. What we build is a lot of changes to roads, traffic signals or widening streets. In a lot of cases for us, it's widening streets to put in bike and pedestrian infrastructure. So it's really hard to sort out what part of that is for the bike and pedestrian infrastructure and what part of that is just because you're rebuilding the road. Just in some cases, if you really looked at it, the bike and pedestrian infrastructure can be pretty expensive because that causes the road to have to be significantly wider. And that's what gets expensive, particularly in the city of Portland where you're buying right of it. I mean, a lot of the reasons we don't have big roads because we don't want to have big roads. But even if we did, we really couldn't. You don't invite it for that in most of the city. So that's it's really hard. I've had some of those exercises to do, and you end up taking a wild guess, to be honest.
It is a challenge, but in my research, And I don't know about how much is spent on other things, but ODOT does, they try to expend 1% of the state highway funds on bike ped projects.
Yeah.
And they spend about 3% of their federal funds on bike ped projects. So,
But like, for example, the other, I mean, Metro, who allocates, so the way federal funds are allocated is by state and then by region. And so Metro allocates the federal funds that go to the Metro region. And I'd say their numbers for biking are significantly higher. I mean, most of our
Yeah.
projects, federally funded projects, are either exclusively bike and ped or are, like I say, projects where we're like rebuilding a road. Like Capitol Highways, for example, even though that's not a federally funded project. Capitol Highway is almost a $40 million project. Some of that is water and sewer infrastructure, but a big chunk of that is we're rebuilding the street. But the street is no different for cars than it was before we started. It's 2 lanes, 1 lane in each direction, and it has, brand new bike and pedestrian facilities on both sides. So I mean, if you really wanted to, you could count almost all of that as bike and ped, except for the sewer and water. So it's just complicated. Wow.
I just want to know your all's thoughts on charter reform, basically, like how. That's a kind of a big
Oh,
question.
boy.
I guess specifically from the perspective of PBOT.
I personally can't speak to that, because, I just can't speak to that because I'm working. Next question.
You can speak to that in like 2 months.
I'm not working. I mean, I guess what I can say is I think it will, there's some really positive things, I think, that can come from that. There is a lot of sort of conflict between bureaus that may go away a little bit, but there's, like everything else, it's gonna be interesting to see what happens. I would say, I don't think there's, the system of government we have is a very unique system of government. It's led to some challenging things. It's also led to some good things. Like, for example, I think if we had a city manager form of government, we may not have a street car. Because that's the kind of thing that a city government that's saying, that's really, thinking only about revenue and those sorts of things, and say, why are we doing this? This is costing us a lot of money. So there's benefits to the streetcar, but they're not necessarily as easy to translate. So that's an example where we have a streetcar because we had a city commissioner for Blumenauer and Charlie Hales who really thought that was an important thing to do and pushed it really hard. Would that happen in the new form of government? I don't know. It's a good question. Right. But it's not the same as having that one, you have a lot more power as a city commissioner. So I don't know. It'll be fun to watch from the sideline.
being inside.
Wow, that's a-
You're positive about it. You have to be. You have to be optimistic. Yeah.
Yeah, it's happening. So yeah, I mean, it's,
Yeah.
This is true.
like, there's probably other things that might have happened during the election I wouldn't be positive about, but that's okay.
Yeah.
It's happening. It'll be interesting to see what happens.
Find this left. Mister?
So like, you have carrots, it's like to, more carrots. Since carrot side. Encouraging people to ride their bikes the weekends. There's a whole bunch of argument at the motor center. Expanding capacity to. There is the group of people that are working on marketing. We're still in night. Marketing bicycles to citizen important to the shoes.
Well, I mean, still might put in a bunch of money for bike rides, so,
That's what I'm-
yeah. I know, that's where it gets.
You No, have you been to timber state? Has anybody been to timber state? I find that to be the most inspiring. And I wonder why that can't be replicated at the Miller Center. Because they also go to Blazers games, and I think I'm like one of the handful of people that fight. But
Part of it is
Timbers,
just the-
there's like, it's like European style bike, like you
Yeah.
cannot find a parking spot for your bike if you show up like to the gate. That's how crazy it is. And so it's like, why can't we replicate that with other events? And why is it just, is it because there's no parking there? Is it because of a marketing thing? Is it because we have bike racks available and we close down the street? And so I wonder, I think about that.
I
Why?
think there's one other factor that for me is a big factor is I go to a few Blazer games too, and the weather is often always moving. And that is, I mean, it's cold and rainy,
Yeah,
and it's, you know, it's, the Blazer games ended. And I mean, there's some factors I think there. Because it's in the winter, that makes it less. I mean, bike traffic goes down. in the winter. It's just-
Yeah.
it's just happens. But it is also not, I mean, you know, the bike racks at the motor center are not well located. They
no, they're not.
don't feel very safe and it's parked very low.
But I'm thinking about even, and I haven't been to very many of that the waterfront, but any of those summer festival events, like, are the number of people that are riding by transit, by bike, by walking, is it as much as what you see at a Timbers game?
Hmm.
So,
That's a good study.
and I think that's like, to me, like every time I go, I just get so excited because there's so many people who ride their bikes, like, should this be replicated all over the city somehow? Why can't we do that? Why can't we do that? Why just the Timbers? Is it the demographics?
I think it might also be, I mean, I did some work with the Blazers when years ago. Their demographic is very. I mean,
I have
they're,
only biked or taken transit to the.
but they're, I mean, I think their average season ticket holder doesn't even report. Doesn't think it's much more of a regional draw.
Yeah.
So I think the Timbers probably.
Curious, like e-bikes, in your guys' experience, do you guys feel like they can sort of change the equation on people's mobility and commuting or getting to the store? Or are they sort of this like
Yes. All positive, all of the research is pointing in that direction.
I will also
It
add,
happens.
I will also, sorry, Hal, I will
Yeah.
also add, I think it could be better.
Yeah.
If we truly want to make an impact in having a more equitable effect, there has to be some mechanism to make it cheaper for those people who can't afford to pay $5,000 for an e-bike. You know, it has to be more equitable.
Or if they didn't see the deal on Rad Bikes for a $499 e-bike.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
So that would up.
I think there's I think they're a huge game changer.
Yeah.
Like, we have several people in our office who are, you know, young parents, and when we had kids, we kind of almost had to have two cars, even though we didn't really. I never drove a car, but just in terms of getting, it's just hard to have kids. If you're both working away from home, it's hard to do. So now the second car for a lot of those parents, all of them actually, is they have e-bikes. It's a great, I mean, it's a good difference. I think that's, but yeah, the price is going down too.
Yeah.
I do have to say though, as a cyclist who used to be a really strong cyclist, who isn't as strong anymore. As I'm riding down the road and I see my rearview mirror, this bike flying up with me, I'm nowadays praying with somebody on an e-bike. God, how slow am I really going?
Okay, we are at time, so let's give them another thing.